Just when I thought I was covering some difficult topics and doing some critical deck analysis, I get an absolute curveball with NARCI FABLE Singer. This Abzan Enchantress really struck a chord in me, and not just because the deck build is unique, but also because it required me to make some heart-wrenching cuts. And I think that there's a lesson to be learned here, because initially I was going to build a heavy Saga theme with plenty of counter manipulation. You know, you remove a counter, you add a counter, and then repeat. However, in practice, this style just simply falls apart. NARCI wants our Sagas to complete, and she wants us to sacrifice our enchantments. That really is the core of the strategy. And I spent many hours tormenting over these different mechanics. And at the end of it, I felt like I really didn't do the deck justice. I worked so hard to pull this deck together, and maybe more accurately, I worked so hard to force a deck together despite the difference in mechanics. And at the end, I was left disappointed. To quote Warren Buffett, it doesn't matter how hard you row, it simply matters what boat you're in. And I was clearly in the wrong boat. Now, please stick around for the end of this video as I have some information on a giveaway that I will be doing later on. So let's start where it all began for me, which is counter manipulation. The theory is excellent. We utilize a card like Hex Parasite to remove the counters, and then we add them back with a card effect or after our draw step. So then the question for me becomes, well, how do we want to add the counters? And an obvious include here is Satsuki, the Living Lore, which did make it into my final deck list, but the only other reliable mechanic really is proliferation. And in Abzan, our pick of proliferation targets is not so enticing, aka our Sagas. And when I built the deck out, I realized that, wow, I have 15 or so cards that are going to either add or remove counters, so counter manipulation, but I only have 15 targets. I only have 15 Sagas that I'm actually going to be manipulating. Not to mention, some of the Sagas simply suck or are so situational that the only reason I would want to run them is to trigger NARCI's second ability. Not to mention that the counter manipulation cards that we have in the deck are taking up deck space for other important things I would want to run otherwise. And it was almost like I was ignoring that first piece of text on NARCI, which reads, whenever you sacrifice an enchantment, draw a card. And I think that other deck techs on YouTube also are making this mistake of not focusing more on that effect. Although I've ruled out counter manipulation as a viable strategy, I still think that proliferation is a mechanic that we can really cash in on. So what does that look like for our deck? Well, my list includes Staff of Completion, Evolution Sage, Yawgmoth Thran Physician, Karn's Bastion, Expand the Sphere, and oh yeah, that's it. Well, unless you include Satsuki, so maybe 6. And I can hear the comments already. Why not include more effects? Why not include more like Unnatural Restoration? And I think the problem is not immediately apparent. Nearly all other proliferation cards that could have gone into this deck will only proliferate a single time, with the exception of Contagion Engine. But even then, I demand more utility and versatility with our proliferation cards. Staff of Completion is a mana rock, card draw, sack outlet, and proliferation key all in one. Evolution Sage is proliferation on a body, and he can also trigger multiple times per turn with a simple fetch land, allowing us to complete our Sagas the turn that they come in. Yawgmoth, well, he always feels good to have in hand and is rarely ever a dead card. Plus, his first ability will Sacrifice, which will often synergize perfectly with NARCI. And his discard synergizes strongly with our payoffs, so he was too good to not include. Karn's Bastion is a land. And Expand the Sphere can either help us ramp if NARCI is removed, or can allow us to proliferate twice later in the game, draining out the board very quickly. So why is it such a big deal to complete our Sagas as fast as possible? Well, I think that the answer is fairly clear. If we play a Saga, it comes into play with a single lore counter on it, and a single proliferation effect is enough to bring it up to 2 lore counters. So if we miss a second method of proliferation, it gives our opponents an entire turn cycle to try and remove NARCI, which is pretty easy to do in a game of Commander, admittedly. Sure, we may still get our Saga Chapter 3 triggers, but we don't get to drain the board. And of course, maybe more importantly, we miss out on that juicy card draw from NARCI. This is why I place much less value on those cards that only allow us to proliferate a single time. Not to mention, what if we don't have a Saga out in the first place? I want our cards to at least be doing something, even if it is just being a blocker. So we've churned through our Sagas, we've ramped out, we've drained the table a bit, but now we need a way to get a bigger payoff. We need a way to win. And this is where our recursion comes in. So I'll be running Brilliant Restoration, Eerie Ultimatum, Open the Vaults, Replenish, and to a lesser extent, Brought Back and Cosmic Intervention. Now, these are all good on their own, but there is a dream scenario where we have NARCI and an evolution stage out when we recur, let's say, 20 CMC of sagas. We play a fetch land, and just like that, the entire table is dead. And the same could be true for our other proliferation methods, but that will require more mana. You know, it's funny, this is a Saga commander, but we haven't even mentioned a Saga card yet. And that's because many of the Saga cards that we could include are just so bad that they fall out of recognition. It becomes a game of picking the best of the worst to a certain extent. So I think I'd rather spend time on the cards that I cut and also the counter synergies that exist, because at the end of the day, I think that'll be more useful for your deck building journey. So let's start with one that I saw in far too many decks, which is the Mending of Dominaria. Yes, this card does mill us, which in some cases can be useful, but primarily we're interested in enchantments being sent to the yard and staying there, and the collateral damage of milling some of our important pieces is just not appealing to me. And in addition, the last chapter of this is actually counter synergy for our specific deck. I would much rather routinely fill up the yard, keep them there for our inevitable blowout turn that we're going to have. Next are flip sagas, such as the Restoration of Iganjo. These particular sagas, upon reaching chapter 3, get exiled, so they will not actually get sacrificed, and they will not subsequently trigger NARCI. You know, this is a large enough downside for me that I completely chose not to run any of them, and most are actually just so bad that they really weren't contenders in the first place. The final saga that I didn't run, despite it being an auto-include for many, is One Ring to Rule Them All. Now, I really do love this card. I love the flavor of it. I love that you get to make a ring bearer first, which makes it legendary so it doesn't die to chapter 2. But what I don't love is that many of our creatures and support in this deck simply get swept by that chapter 2 ability with no upside for us whatsoever, often resulting in a net negative for us. And if you really wanted a board wipe, why not just run something like Toxic Deluge, which is just simply better? Consistency is your friend here, so don't make a stupid bet and then complain when the card ends up biting you. Now let's talk lands. Hall of Heliod's Generosity is not exactly our preferred effect. Yes, it does offer utility, but at the cost of only producing colorless mana in an otherwise pip-heavy deck. The only non-colored land that I run in the deck was already mentioned, which is Karn's Bastion, for obvious reasons. Now the same goes for Reliquary Tower, but not just because it produces colorless mana. I've heard too many people defend just how powerful Reliquary Tower is, and I think people put too much value on it. There will be numerous situations when we actually want to discard our sagas. Maybe our 7 CMC saga is stuck in our hand as early as turn 2, and it would be beneficial for us to actually dump it into the graveyard to get value out of our recursion pieces later. This is also why I don't include Thought Vessel or Decanter of Endless Water, despite the fact that these are included in numerous Enchantress decks. Piggybacking off of this, I want to talk about a personal favorite of mine for this deck, Land Tax. So Land Tax is not a saga, however, it does have a fantastic ability and is a great include in this deck. Depending on our turn order, we will easily be able to pull out 6 to 9 lands reliably from our deck. And although it's a meme in the community, yes, this does thin your deck and ensures that you are also going to be mana fixed in an otherwise 3-color commander deck. This also amplifies the power of our Enchantress cards like Eidolon of Blossoms. So we'll be drawing more gas instead of those basic lands that we've now pulled out of the deck. Also, if we have too many cards in hand because of our land tax, that's fine. Simply discard down to hand size and we can put our bigger sagas and bigger enchantments into the graveyard to later be recurred by our big blowout recursion pieces. Next, I want to talk about our ramp sources in this deck. If you ever built Sithis, you know that you can very easily just chuck in all of those low to the ground cheap enchantments, which also happen to ramp us at the same time. But NARCI demands something a little bit different, and we have to focus on more lands matter cards. Now, why is this? Well, for instance, Colony Heart Expedition sacrifices itself while at the same time ramping. Check. The Weatherseed Treaty is a saga. Check. Burgeoning cares about us having a bunch of lands in our hand, which we easily will with our draw engine. Check. Expand the Sphere cares about our lands, but also doubles as proliferation. Check. Dryad of the Elysian Grove is an enchantment itself and has some synergy with our deck. Check. Evolution Sage cares about how many lands we can play in a turn. Check again, and so on. You get the picture. You see why I had to cut certain cards like Fertile Ground, which otherwise would have been included in other Enchantress-style decks. It simply didn't make any sense for the overall structure and function of this specific deck. Speaking of difficult cuts, my very last one was Resurgent Belief. Now, I have a video coming out soon regarding time counters on exiled cards, and it gets very difficult to properly use these because our opponents have the exact knowledge of when they will be employed. So we're literally telegraphing to our opponents, hey, I'm about to blow this game out, but you have 2 turns to stop me. It really looks better on paper than it does in practice. And our last cut for this deck was just a small one, which is Jukai Naturalist. This was for 2 reasons. Jukai Naturalist has 2 pips in it, and I really did try my best, even if you look at the deck, to cut down on the pip requirements of things in an already pip-heavy deck. And also, we do have some proliferation strategy in this deck. So something like Starfield Mystic will actually get an additional +1 counter every time we proliferate, which could matter. And also, Herald of the Pantheon, I think, is overall just a better sort of life gain cost reduction effect when compared to the Naturalist. If you're like me, you love a good budget deck, so I made one for you. There will be 2 deck lists down in the description, our more premium one, and also the more budget version of the deck. But here's a few highlights on some notable includes. First, we're going to be cutting Replenish in favor of the aforementioned Resurgent Belief. This alone is going to save you about $60. Next, I cut Smothering Tithe in favor of Mirari's Wake, which admittedly they are not the same thing, but I think Mirari's Wake is a good replacement and is going to put a ton of work in at a budget price. And then we added a few other cute cards that I couldn't quite fit into our premium deck, such as Yenna Redtooth Regent, Flicker of Fate, and Doomwake Giant. This budget deck list can save you upwards of $300 to $400 depending on where you're going to be sourcing your cards from. At the time of making this video, we are actually closing in on 500 subscribers, which is just crazy to me. When I first set out to make videos on this channel, my main goal was just to make informative videos that were actually useful. And so far, I think that I've succeeded. And I've had YouTube channels in the past where maybe over the course of a year, I've gained 400, but this past month alone has been about 440 people, which is just crazy. Like that's 440 people that said, you know, yes, you are actually worth my time to continue watching. And that blows me away. So as a thank you, I'm just going to be giving away some of these Zendikar Rising welcome boosters just to, you know, share in the joy of opening packs with your personal play group. You will have 1 week from the release of this video just to comment anything down below, and that's just enough to enter you. I'll choose 3 people at random to get 4 packs each, 1 for each in your play group. I will ship internationally as well, all costs included, so all of you Australians had better be commenting. And you know, whether you win or not, I really hope that you take some time just to share this video with your friends and your play group so that they can join in the community as we continue to grow together. As always, you can find both of my deck lists down in the description below, along with my Architect profile. And you can also find my business email in the description if you wish to reach out with any inquiries. The absolute best way to support me, however, is to subscribe to the channel. Growing the channel means more outreach and chances to collaborate with other creators, which is a big goal of mine. Support my addiction so I can continue supporting your addiction. I've been Kyle, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks. Bye.